On several occasions, I've been asked what I think about Stoicism. The question itself seems simple, but the answer is not, if only because the question lacks detail. Addressing it, however, is something that I think of as worthy, and Stoic thought does have value, perhaps now more than ever in our increasingly deluded and deranged modern world. But neither the question nor the answer can have value without first going into the origins of Stoicism and what the ancients professed to believe, if only for a bit. To the best of our knowledge, Stoicism, as a formal philosophy, originated with Zeno of Citium, and is derived from the Greek word stoa, meaning porch. Zeno's philosophy centered around the value of the absence of passion, the Greek word apatheia, whence the modern and English word apathy is derived. He believed that suppression and control of physical desires and emotions were the key to self-mastery and indeed necessary in order to navigate the world. And the original Stoic worldview, as espoused by Zeno, assigned primary importance to the acceptance of fate, or put more simply, what happens, happens, to live within the framework and bounds of nature and the world. Necessarily being subordinate to it is the manner in which one ought to conduct oneself. Seen in this light, there is fair overlap with some basic teachings of Buddhism. Stoicism was, at its core, markedly and notably deterministic in nature. In the centuries subsequent to Zeno, Stoicism became one of the most popular philosophical worldviews of the time, possibly ending with the death of its major Roman exponent, Marcus Aurelius, in 180 AD. That is an exceptionally brief overview of Stoicism, its tenets and origins, but this video is neither meant to be a history lesson nor a presentation of the history of philosophy. The more pertinent question to be raised is whether or not there is any value in Stoic thought today, however watered down it might be. To begin with, I think it is a very difficult proposition for anyone to formally declare adherence to some specific set of principles. After all, formal Stoicism of the sort that arose in Antiquity eventually died in popularity, ceding its place to a less rational worldview of the sort partially espoused by Christian doctrine. What we have left is a general framework, a perspective that can, at best, be seen as guiding principles rather than an outright philosophy. Of great importance to highlight here is the fact that modernity itself is highly resistant to Stoic thought. Indeed, the raison d'être of modernity's denizen is decidedly more Epicurean in the modern sense of the word, and therefore lacking whatever insights might have accompanied Epicurean thought of old, or even hedonistic thought without the ethical constraints and concerns attached to that ancient school of thought. In fact, I'm inclined to call modernity itself and its revelers an Epicurean shell, as what is offered is quite the perversion of what Epicurus himself taught. Epicureanism of old was a philosophy of abnegation in many ways, teaching the necessity of modesty in one's worldly acquisitions, the limiting of earthly desires, because in seeking the greatest pleasure in life, Epicurus reasoned, one ought to avoid pain, and those things which lead to pain, and finally an understanding of the workings of the world. There is consensus with the basic tenet of hedonism, that pleasure is the sole good to be had in the world, but neither ancient hedonism nor Epicureanism have much to do with the unconstrained pleasure-seeking of the modern ape, because the attainment of one's own pleasure in the modern world is, perforce, joined by excessive cupidity, prurience, and the general inability to practice any sort of self-restraint, in short, the polar opposite of the reasoned and rational views of the old Hellenistic world. All of the desire, but none of the wisdom to temper it, as it were. And this leads us, very quickly, to the question, does any sort of Stoicism, formal or otherwise, have a place in our world in the current year? I think the answer to this question is a decided yay, for fairly obvious reasons. Despite all of our advancements, our delusions of grandeur and self-assigned self-importance, the world and universe remain uniquely indifferent in their outlook to our whims and desires, and all the observations of the thinkers of old hold the same weight they do today as they did in the days of yore. We all suffer, fall ill, and die, and the only choice left to us on the path of nothingness to something, and subsequently the return to nothingness, is how we choose to address and deal with the slings and arrows of predictable fortune that will inevitably be thrown our way. The American phrase referring to life's curveballs comes to mind. Given all this, there is value to be had and found in a Stoic appreciation of life. But there is also a real challenge here, because I, for one, do not believe in an individual's capacity to formulaically declare one's loyalty to a set of principles, philosophical, religious, or otherwise. The adoption of one's worldview is both spontaneous and incremental, but most importantly, I do not believe anyone makes a decision to believe or profess something. It is something thought and felt, brought about by our interaction with the norms. And even if one were to consciously, quote-unquote, decide to believe something, the decision would remain inconsequential in its reach if attendant matters of cause and effect were not at play. That is, did the person examine how he got there in the first place? No, I do not think we can decide to believe something, yet the question remains, of what value is Stoic thought, and how does one naturally come into it? There's obviously a confluence of factors, one's natural constitution, circumstance and age, for example. Life, the path that is begotten from nothing, leads ineluctably to that same nothing. And on this path, some degree of the Stoic will of necessity be adopted by the perspicacious and aware. All around us, the trappings of modernity seek to thwart what can only be seen as a rational and perhaps even instinctual cognitive process of coming to terms with reality. The illusions offered by pleasure, by escapism, by the type of self-directed geocentrism, in a universe that defies it all upon any examination. None of this can stand up to scrutiny, and our Sisyphean strivings always end in one way or another, because as Skuld assures us, the most important feature of the future is that there is no future, at least not for us as an individual, given sufficient passing of time, and thus we are naturally beset, I feel at least, by inclinations and leanings towards the Stoic, as after all, to feel too intensely or acutely in this ever-changing world that at some point in time will consume you can lead to no good. Evolution is a strange beast in this regard, as none of us has evolved to successfully contemplate the nature of the reality into which we have been thrust. Rather, we are equipped and driven by forces that more often than not drive us in the opposite direction. Achilles' rage is, after all our rage, and only with age, happenstance, and degradation do we conduct ourselves any better. And thus I am forced to ask this question: how can any man who has seen his share of winters not in due course develop a carapace of dignified indifference, and the desire to understand the causal chain that led him to that state? In the torrent and storm of life, what use is it to rage impotently at the maelstrom? What is there to be gained but frustration and anguish? If the tempest seeks to consume you, then let it, and if you have the fortune to come out of it, scathed or unscathed, then reflect upon the journey, and I think it inexorable and inevitable that whatever the weavers sought to convey to you in that storm, you shall understand both yourself and the world better than you had in younger, more benighted years. When illness, infirmity, and calamity befall you enough times, only the truly mad would care about the mundane to the point of self-harm. There is no simple answer. Life itself, to my mind, will render you a Stoic, of a sort, or one of more Stoic persuasion than you had been as another in days bygone. The thief teaches as much as he steals, if you pay proper attention. But ignoring wholesale the existence of the thief is a surefire way to lead you down the path of damnation, which is to say that Stoic thought, however you come into it, is of no value to those who deny reality. I think a fitting way to end this video is to pose the question openly to the air, to the gods, to the audience, to all, as to what the nature of the balance between the indifference that is naturally inculcated into an individual over time by the lights of Stoic thought and the natural requirement of human ego that must be in place in order to accomplish things, to do things, to take up arms against the sea of perceived troubles. That is the riddle, I think, the ultimate riddle of Stoic thought. Not how one gets from A to B, but rather, after arriving at B, whither now? That is the question, an open one, and one that I cannot answer, and I think no one man can. It really will be a matter of the subjective in this specific case, as we are all constituted differently. Well, thank you for watching, and I will check you out in all likelihood at a later date, assuming I'm still alive. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.